Thank you, Mark. I think I wish half of it what you said was the true, but yes, I'm an old timer. I know that. I been around for a while, and I'm pleased to be here. And since 2007, I've been honored to be part of the advisory board of the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy. And I have seen with a lot of interest that how this institution has developed and expanded under the wise leadership of Mark. And I actually am always pleased to be here and speak to you. Now, speaking to you on Central Asia is somehow very strange because some of you probably come from Central Asia. How many are from Central Asia here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. But other friends probably, they know Central Asia very well from the talks and speeches that was delivered here during this conference. I spent many years in Central Asia. From 1993 to 2000, I was the editor-at-large and analyst for the Voice of America in Central Asia. And I had an office in Almaty at that time. And from Almaty, I used to go around to 5 countries in Central Asia and also to Caucasus, to Azerbaijan and others. And I used to go from Washington. I was based in Washington with the Voice of America because I was responsible for Central Asia twice a year, 2 months, 3 months. And this 7 years gave me a lot of opportunity, not only to know the countries in Central Asia, but also to meet the leaders of those countries, very great leaders there. And I interviewed most of them. And therefore, what I am going to share with you are some talks, some observations that I have from Central Asia. Well, Central Asia is actually today 5 countries. But in fact, it is one unified cultural area. There are commonalities. In some cases, even language commonalities, religious commonalities, in other art commonalities, and cultural commonalities, and history as a whole. You know, there was a book published by many years ago. It has become a classic of Bartold, Turkestan. That book is translated in many languages. Turkestan actually represents the Central Asia as a whole. It is a historical, document. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's translated in many languages, including English. And I think also it is actually Russian too. So if when you have chance, so it's Central Asia as a unified somehow of culture. However, what happened to Central Asia in the turn of the 20th century, it was divided into 5 countries or 5 republics, Soviet republics, in the case of parceling out different parts of what they call it Razmijavanie, that they created these 5. Now, it is very interesting to see that these countries are divided administratively, just to be administered by the overlord, by the Soviet Union. However, those borders that was drawn arbitrarily, actually after the breakup of the Soviet Union, became another issue that divides the country into 5 countries. It is, it is very interesting. It was very interesting for me to go from Tajikistan to Uzbekistan and saw that the people in Samarkand and Bukhara speak the same language as they speak in Dushanbe or in Khujand. I went from, for example, from Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan. In Charjoy and on Mari, the people, the Uzbek people, they were speaking Uzbek, but they were in Turkmenistan. I went to Osh here, and you have Kyrgyz and Uzbeks there. And they are living together, but the Uzbeks are in Andijan, and also Uzbeks are in Osh, in Jalalabad. On the other hand, when you see the people. Some people have their property across the border. And if you go from Kazakhstan, if you go from Tashkent, if you want to go Tashkent to Samarkand, partly you pass through Kazakhstan in one part. So the roads are imperial roads, and now they are separate countries. However, it is very, very interesting that to see that because of the political changes, with political ambitions, these countries wanted to maintain those borders that was drawn as part of the imperial necessities. Now they are solid borders between these countries. What is the cultural impact of it? First of all, these countries, the dominant ethnic groups in these countries became the majority. In these majorities, actually influence the minorities in these countries who have majorities in other countries. Tajik minorities in Uzbekistan have Tajik majorities in Tajikistan. Uzbek minorities in Tajikistan have major majorities in Uzbekistan. If you go to Shymkent in Kazakhstan, you have many Uzbeks there. And the same way. Now, what happens this kind of borders creates political problems. How you can solve it? You can solve it in two ways. One is through creating a kind of an economic space. It was tried in the past. I remember once I was in Farghana. In those days, the UNODC tried to create a joint space for fighting counter narcotics in 3 adjacent oblasts, they call it, provinces. Khojand, at that time they call it Leninabad, and Khojand in Tajikistan, Andijan in Uzbekistan, and Osh in Kyrgyzstan. All are in the Farghana Valley. And the drug used to go through Tajikistan, to Achikabad, Murghab, to Osh, and then from Osh to Uzbekistan, and then to Kazakhstan. In order to control this, they created a joint space there. It only lasted 6 months. After 6 months, the border issues came along, and then these border issues, which was drawn during the imperial part, became a barrier in cooperation between the 10 countries that for centuries lived together. So, what is the solution? Is the solution political? So far, it didn't work. Solution economic? Didn't work. But the day that the people here make more exchanges, cultural exchanges, probably cultural diplomacy will create an environment that in that environment, people will realize that they are from the same area, despite the fact that they cannot change the borders now. It became very solid. On the other hand, the economic development in these countries are uneven. Kazakhstan has advanced a lot than the other countries. Uzbekistan better than Tajikistan. And then Kyrgyzstan, the economy is not comparable to Uzbekistan in Kazakhstan. Turkmenistan has its own problem, and neutrality becomes one of the issues for them, that it is neutral even in neutrality. So therefore, it is. However, I think these people are the same people, and the people fear each other, concern each other, because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't contact each other. If you contact people, you know better people. When you know people better, then you don't fear them anymore. You become cooperative. I think in the Second World War, there was a major book published by Quincy Wright, The War on the War. And one of the theses that he had that book was that proximity can be a driver for conflict or a driver for cooperation. Because when you're in proximity, if you compete with each other, it can lead to conflict. It can become drivers of conflict. But if you realize that if you work together, it will benefit both sides. It will be win-win. Then that proximity becomes a driver of stability, of cooperation, of prosperity in the world. I'm sorry that I didn't recognize this. Mr. Jalali is old friend and a great politician in Afghanistan. I'm sorry that I did not get him. So it was right. Now, can we do that? You know, in 1997, I was in Dushanbe at the time that the peace agreement was signed. It was signed in Moscow, actually, later on, but it was drafted in Dushanbe when I was there. At that time, I had to talk with Dawlat Osman, was in the, Mr. Nouri. The late Nouri was alive at that time. He was the leader of the Islamic-led democratic opposition. And Dawlat Osman was his deputy. And also, Imam Ali Rahmanov was the president. And then it was, the peace agreement was hosted by Russia and also Iran. I asked them whether the peace will return to Tajikistan now. And they said, yes, officially, yes. Unofficially, you have to talk to the people. I went to Hisar. Hisar is the traditional capital of that area, which is very close to Dushanbe. Dushanbe was created later on. Hisar was the traditional, major city of Bukhara at that time, Bukhara Emirate. I went and asked several people in the mosque that whether that peace agreement is going to bring peace to to Tajikistan. He said, well, it will stop war, but it will not bring reconciliation. Reconciliation will come after we talk to each other, we forgive each other, we rediscover each other, then the peace will come. How said you do? He said, it will take time. Yes, cultural diplomacy takes time. And I was talking to Mark earlier about this, and then, if you look at the conflict, preventing conflict, doing conflict, sustaining peace, there are three major phases. Preventing conflict, the public diplomacy, the cultural diplomacy does a lot, does magics to prevent. Why people don't like each other? Why people go to war? Because they fear each other. Cultural diplomacy can ease that kind of situation. During the war is very difficult because the speed of diplomacy and speed of violence is two different things. It is, in physics, the differential. It is a differential that does not work there. The speed of violence outpaces the speed of talks, the speed of cultural context. Then you have sustainability. After the peace is done, then you have to sustain it because no peace can survive unless it is legitimate, it is inclusive, it is sustainable. Now, to make it sustainable, then you go to these other diplomacies. Official diplomacies, fine. But official diplomacy, official diplomacy, I'm not putting my diplomat hat on, I'm putting my academic hat now. So what I'm saying, I'm not representing anybody. I'm representing some of the studies I have done. So then, what diplomacy is more sustainable? That's the people understand it. That's cultural diplomacy. I don't know how to. You may have some questions, and I will open it to question and answer. If you just make it an interaction, and if you have to make a comment, a kind of a question, or anything that you want to say, the floor is open to you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So as always, if you could raise your hands and then briefly introduce yourselves. ladies first. I see a hand already there. Okay.
My name is Jana. I came from Almaty,
Mm-hmm.
and I represent probably NGO that is on culture. And in a few week, we have the first conference of art managers in Bishkek. So there will be about 50 people working in the culture in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. And they are all independent cultural projects that are not state. But now I'd like to ask you whether what do you believe is the strongest impact on this cultural diplomacy, upside down or vice
Yeah.
versa?
Thank you very much. That's a very, very good question. There's always a conflict between the two,
Oh, yeah.
unfortunately now. Because this, to justify why these 5 Central Asian countries are really different, the leaders of those countries actually try to depend on historical icons that was common to all regions, but they wanted these icons to be part of only one of these states. You remember I was in Tashkent in 1993 when the Uzbekistan, inaugurated or actually launched the statue of Amir Timur. And called Amir Timur the Ulugh Babamiz, said Ulugh Babamiz, he said, and the grandfather of the nation. While Amir Timur belonged to all of Central Asia. So they made in 1986, they named the year as the year of Amir Timur in Samarkand, then made that monument in Samarkand. Before that, Kyrgyzstan in 1995 celebrated the 1,000 years of Manas. Manas was a great hero of the region, and who actually created the Kyrgyz Empire in those days, between East Turkestan and West Turkestan. So Manas became an icon for Kyrgyzstan. Then Tajikistan did not want to, be excluded from this race. They actually went deeper into history and revived Ismail Samani, who was the leader of Samani Empire, and that belonged to all Central Asia, even South, Khorasan. They made Samani as the symbol of the nationalism of Kyrgyzstan. Well, Kazakhstan is different because Kazakhstan is Kazakh, and the northern part was also the Russians were there. Once I was talking to Chengiz Aytmatov. You know Chengiz Aytmatov? He is a very famous philosopher of Central Asia and Russian literature, actually. I asked him whether after the break of the Soviet Union, are you going south or are you going north? Which way are you going? Are you going to the legacy of the North, that the Soviet Union was the overlord? Or you are going now south because of your cultural affinities to the south? He said, look, we know that we have some affinities to the south. But we have learned something during the past 60, 70 years under the Soviet Union. Soviet Union exposed us to the Western civilization. We're not going to get rid of it. So therefore, it will be both. Now, if you go to the modernization and then you go one way, if you want to go back to history and find your roots in the history, that's totally different things. Now, I think it is not the only small NGOs that can make a difference. It's the leadership too, make the leadership. I think what happens, that the history that should divide this area has been used, the history that should unite the area has been used to divide the area. So in that kind of environment, NGOs can do some local, probably, can make some local achievements and accomplishments, but very hard that only NGOs can do that. If you that in a country that you see that the majority is trying to impose its culture on minorities, then that is the beginning of the problem. So I think the solution at that time that many people for Central Asia was promoting in the 1990s was you have two choices. In all countries with different ethnicities, including Afghanistan, you have two choices. You can go to integrate people on the basis of democratic development. One man, one vote, all equal as citizens to the law. This way, a person is become a unit. Or you go and parcel out the quotas to different ethnicities. You perpetuate the division. On the first case, democratic solution will bring you eternal integration. On the quota system, probably will perpetuate the division that you have. Now, NGOs are doing good, but NGOs should need to be supported by the state itself. In many cases, NGOs are looked as opposition in many countries. They think that the NGOs is another form of opposing the policies of the government. I don't know. It depends how much support NGOs can get from the state. Then they can make a difference. Yeah.
Additional questions, comments? Okay.
Yes, sir.
My name is Mark. I just wanted to thank you for coming and everything. It's wonderful hearing you speak, but I'm from the United States, and my question is more in terms of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And obviously, the war in Afghanistan is the longest war that the United States has been in for some time now, or in the history of the country. And my question for you, as you spoke about peace and how violence is a quicker option to take away from the sustainability of peace, what you find a lot, especially in the military operations in Afghanistan, is that there are just some regions that they've never really been able to bring peace to, and that there's that the country itself is divided into many different ethnic groups and many different parts. And so I'm wondering if maybe through cultural diplomacy tactics or maybe through other types of initiatives, is there a way to unite parts or to at least extend peace farther from the Kabul region of Afghanistan?
Well, I can tell you one thing, that there are so many myths about Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. One myth is that Afghanistan is a collection of different ethnicities, different tribes, therefore, they think that in Afghanistan always there was internal strife between tribes and others. Well, this is not true. Afghanistan is an atomized society, I would say. It is the tribes and the regions, other organizations, institutions, are the framework through which the individuals seek their interests or to protect themselves, why the government cannot provide that. Other than that, I think the worst thing in Afghanistan historically was when there was no central government. That's a nightmare. So they want a government. However, if that government cannot deliver, then people go to their local institutions to protect themselves in order to secure their interests. That is something that happened to us. However, it does not mean that these small elements, whatever you call it, local institutions, they are the drivers of division. No, they're not. Because that can, even during civil wars, you do not see a call or an effort for secession. Even during the civil war, everybody was, fighting for Kabul, not for their regions. And in the 19th century, for more than a century, the British Empire and the Russian Empire, when they failed to dominate the country, they wanted this country to be a buffer to block the clashes between the two titans, two great powers. That small country actually played that role. However, in the 20th century, that small country fought both empires successfully. In the beginning of the 20th century, the British Empire, and toward the end of the 20th century, the successor of the other empire, the Soviet Union. But still that country is there in the border. No one wants to do secession. Yes, individuals during the Civil War, during the occupation of the Soviet Union, individuals tried to legitimize their leadership by invoking ethnic references. It does not mean that they are therefore you have to look at the dynamics of power in the country in order to explain that thing. The nationhood of Afghans are not based on ethnicity, not on region, not on geography. It's by history. It is like Ernest Renan said, it is the will to persist together, because that's the only way that they can persist. Afghanistan is located geographically on the fault lines of three regions: Central Asia, West Asia, and South Asia. But historically, they were faced the same fate, same thing. With regards to the peace in Afghanistan, we have to do, what is peace in Afghanistan? What is the victory? What's the military victory in Afghanistan? If you are looking at the intervention of the US-led operation in 2001, which came, people saw it as a rescue operation. Okay, it achieved its objective in 2 months. It was launched to disrupt or destroy the network of Al-Qaeda, and to remove the Taliban who were supporting them. In 2 months, the Taliban regime was overthrown, and then the Al-Qaeda network was on the run. So it was achieved in 2 months. If you are talking to this, it was achieved. Now, after that, some people are saying, okay, if the United States or the international community by deployment of 150,000 troops could not bring peace to Afghanistan, how can they bring peace in 10,000? I hear it in the media. This is a very, very fallacy, is very, not a very logical, kind of a rational or a logical argument. If we are looking at what was achieved in Afghanistan in the past 15 years, as the establishment of indigenous capacity, that was the reason, not to fight the war to the end. Today, those troops are not in Afghanistan. But the indigenous capacity was built in 15 years. They are doing the war now, despite the fact that they are facing the odds, but they are fighting. They suffer, they get killed, many economic institutions are destroyed, but they are fighting. So if that is the reason, if the reason was to build indigenous capacity in a country, to do the war, to respond to the threats themselves, so that was achieved. Now, why the war is continued? This is a war that is not only local, it's regional, it's global. So that the solution can come through all these dynamics. Once Afghanistan history did not begin in 1978. Afghanistan was at peace with itself before that. At peace with its neighbors. At peace with everybody. Once I was talking to an old man in Ghazni, I said, he was complaining. I said, what the international community should do that will convince you, to make you happy? I said, no, this is a very wrong question you are asking me. He said, what I want, the international community, nobody else can do it for me. I said, what is that? He said, well, if they cannot do it, why I should tell you? I said, no, just for my own information. What is that you want? He said, okay, I will tell you. He said, can the international community, those who are involved in Afghanistan, can undo what they did to us. I said, what do you mean? He said, look, we are a peaceful country. First, the Soviet Union came and invaded us to prop up a small communist government. And they fought everybody in Afghanistan. They destroyed the agriculture, killed 150 civilians, 1.5 million civilians. They destroyed all institutions. And then other forces came from the world to fight the Soviet Union in Afghanistan and made it the last battlefield of the Cold War. In order to fight the Soviet Union, they brought all unwanted people here from all over the world, the fundamentalists. They brought them to fight this. And then the Soviet Union collapsed. And everybody left. And we were left, and we thought that now our brothers will come to help this broken nation. They came, but they came to how exploit this nation, this broken nation. So now he said that they cannot do what I mentioned. Can they undo what they did to us? So in Afghanistan, it is not a civil war. It is a war with terrorism. It is war with competition in the region. It is war with competition globally. That's why it is very, and academically, there's a leadership, they call it complex adaptive leadership. When variable changes very quickly, and things morph from one form to another form. Morphing, yes, things morph. When they morph, then what you have? You have paradoxes. You have competing elements. Like, for example, you are facing so many problems that in these problems, if you solve one, the side effect makes, complicate the other one. How you do this? It takes a very, very long time. It's a very complex kind of a leadership, not only locally, but regionally and also internationally. That's why I'm saying if you look in Afghanistan, you look in that kind of context. Not that today one district would fall to the Taliban, the other way, the other district. Not that way. It is, I suggest that you look at the some literature on the complex adaptive systems, complex adaptive leadership and systems. That will probably give you the complexity of situation in Afghanistan and the region.
Do we have a final question or a final comment from the ambassador? Okay, so on that note, then I guess let's express our sincere gratitude to the Honorable Ambassador Ali Jalali.
Thank you very much.